Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. Today's show will be episode 11 and final episode of My Confession, Recollections of a Rogue by Samuel Chamberlain. And we are finishing off chapter 35. Glanton's gang. 20 miles from the canyon, we came to a mule trail that crossed the ravine and ascended the right-hand bank on foot. We came out on a broad plateau, and after an hour's sharp trot, came in sight of some distant buildings on a hill, mud hovels, and the tower of a church and a presidio. This was the town of Frontieras. Leaving the trail, we directed our course towards a small grove of cottonwoods on the bank of a small stream. Here, under the shade trees, engaged in sleeping, playing cards, cleaning arms, and grooming horses, were some 40 wild, brigand-like men who welcomed my companion with rough greetings. To my great joy, my old acquaintances of Ben Tobin, Doc Irving, and Sam Tate of McCulloch's Rangers came forward and bid Pellencillo Jack welcome to Glanton's bivouac. A rough-looking, short, thick-set man came forward and saluted Hitchcock and myself in the following choice language. "What in hell have you got there, Tom? Where were ye spawned, stranger, and where do ye tie up?" I recognized in this frontier Chesterfield, the John Glanton of the San Antonio Bexar Exchange tragedy, and was about to answer him when he extended his hand as if to shake hands with me. I reached out mine when the ruffian with a hoarse laugh seized me by the nose, giving it a severe twist. Surprised and indignant at such unwarranted treatment, the moment he let go, without thinking of the consequence, I struck him with all my might in the face, sending him to the grass. My safety was now the question. Springing onto my horse, I drew my revolver, but fortunately, before I could fire, I was lassoed and dragged to the ground and tied to a tree. Glanton arose with the blood streaming from his face, staggered up to me, and presented a cocked revolver to my head. Though I expected instant death, I looked the brute calmly in the eyes while I silently prayed to my heavenly Father for forgiveness. For full 1 minute, he glared into my eyes with the cold tube pressed against my forehead, and then lowering his pistol, he grasped my hand and, shaking it warmly, said, "Real grit, stranger. You'll pass. Ye strike like the kick of a burro." I found I had passed a successful ordeal and was thus initiated into Glanton's band. There were Sonorans, Cherokee and Delaware Indians, French Canadians, Texans, Irishmen, a Negro, and a full-blooded Comanche in this band of scalp hunters, with a miscellaneous collection of weapons and equipment, and a diversity of costumes seldom seen in a regular organized body of volunteers for Indian warfare. John Glanton was born in South Carolina, but when a mere youth, his parents moved to Texas and joined the settlement of Stephen Austin. Nothing remarkable distinguished Glanton in his youth from the other young men of the settlement. Without it was a deep religious feeling and a strict moral conduct. A young orphan girl, whose parents had been killed by the Lipins, gained the affections of the young South Carolinian. His love was returned, the marriage day was set, and his affianced was only 17. Glanton had built a log hut for his bride on the bank of the beautiful Guadalupe, and one day, while most of the male settlers was at Austin's house discussing the threatening attitude of Mexico, a band of Lipin warriors charged on the outskirts of Gonzales, killing and scalping the old women and young children, and carrying away the girls, Glanton's betrothed, among the latter. The alarm was given, and instant pursuit made by the frenzied frontiersmen. The next day, the savages were overtaken and suffered a severe defeat at the hands of the outraged Texans. But the prize for which they fought, the poor girls, were tomahawked and scalped while the fight was raging. From this tragic scene, Glanton returned a changed man. He would often absent himself from the village, and when he returned, he invariably brought fresh scalps. During the War of Texas Independence, Glanton was a free scout attached to Fannon's command, and was one of the few who escaped from the massacre at Goliad. He always raised the hair of his slain, and rumor gave him the credit of being the owner of a mule load of these barbarous trophies, smoke-dried in his lonely hut on the Guadalupe. He drank deeply and sought the companionship of the most hardened desperados of the frontier. In all Indian fights, he was the devil incarnate. During the civil wars between the regulators and the moderators, Glanton would join neither party, but with the utmost impartiality picked a quarrel with some famous fighter of one or the other party and rubbed him out. Any other man in Texas would have been lynched, but his terrible loss, his services in the Mexican and Indian wars, made him respected by the masses and gave him strong friends of men in power. He was outlawed by Houston, but this did not affect him in the least. During the late war between the United States and Mexico, he was a free ranger hanging around our army without belonging to it, often going out with scouting parties, but always independent of all authority. At the close of the Mexican War, hearing that the governor of Sonora was offering dollars for every Apache scalp brought in, he organized a motley band of adventurers and entered the service of his old enemy, General D. Jose Urrea, the butcher of Fannon's command. Urrea gladly gave all encouragement to the scalp hunters and seemed equally pleased when Ranger or Indian went under. He offered an additional bounty of $1,000 for the hair of the famous Apache chief Santana. Glanton had made 2 raids in the Indian country, but with small profit, and had met with considerable loss. There was in camp drying 37 of these disgusting articles of trade, Apache scalps, cut with the right ear on to prevent fraud, as some Indians have 2 circles to their hair. This was the band of cutthroats that I had joined, and such was John Glanton, the captain of the scalp hunters of Sonora. Chapter 36. Life with the scalp hunters. Next day after my arrival at Fronteras, Glanton with 10 men started for La Villa de Mapimi to obtain the bounty on the scalps. During their absence, we had rather a gay time, attending fandangos in town and receiving calls of the poblanas of the place in camp. The second in command, now left in charge of the camp, was a man of gigantic size called Judge Holden of Texas. Who or what he was, no one knew, but a cooler-blooded villain never went unhung. He stood 6'6" in his moccasins, had a large, fleshy frame, a dull tallow-colored face destitute of hair and all expression. His desires was blood and women, and terrible stories were circulated in camp of horrid crimes committed by him when bearing another name in the Cherokee Nation and Texas. And before we left Fronteras, a little girl of 10 years was found in the chaparral, foully violated and murdered. The mark of a huge hand on her little throat pointed him out as the ravisher, as no other man had such a hand. But though all suspected, no one charged him with a crime. Holden was by far the best educated man in northern Mexico. He conversed with all in their own language, spoke in several Indian lingos. At a fandango, would take the harp or guitar from the hands of the musicians and charm all with his wonderful performance, and outwaltz any poblana of the ball. He was plumb center with rifle or revolver, a daring horseman, acquainted with the nature of all the strange plants and their botanical names, great in geology and mineralogy. In short, another admirable Crichton, and withal an arrant coward. Not but that he possessed enough courage to fight Indians and Mexicans or anyone where he had the advantage in strength, skill, and weapons, but where the combat would be equal, he would avoid it if possible. I hated him at first sight, and he knew it, yet nothing could be more gentle and kind than his deportment towards me. He would often seek conversation with me and speak of Massachusetts, and to my astonishment, I found he knew more about Boston than I did. At the end of 5 days, Glanton returned without money, 3 of the party wounded, and all as mad as hornets. Their story was as follows. The second night after they left us, they discovered a camp of Sonorans, and judging that they must have goods of value, they resolved to plunder them, disguising themselves as Indians. At midnight, they charged the camp with frightful yells. The surprised Sonorans made but little resistance and fled, leaving their camp to the supposed Apaches. Glanton found some 40 mules and burros with pack saddles, blankets, and provisions, but no money and 5 women. 3 Mexicans were killed. They were scalped, as well as 3 of the women, who, being old and ugly, were knocked on the head. The murderers, turning loose the stock, withdrew, carrying away the best of the blankets and the 2 young señoritas. Traveling all night, they reached a retired place that they considered safe from pursuit. Here they spent the day in a brutal saturnalia, the 2 girls being subjected to gratify the lust of the gang. At dark, they in turn were surprised by a large body of Sonorans who took them for Apaches. The unfortunate girls were brained at once to prevent all unpleasant discovery, and then with the fierce war whoop of the Tontos, they charged their assailants with Indian lances with so much fury that they gained a free passage. Glanton, not deeming it safe to venture into Mapimi, returned to Frontieras with 8 additional scalps and 3 men wounded. A stormy council of war was held. Glanton said that the senoritas had stated that their party was on its way to Upper California, where gold had been found in immense quantity. Similar rumors of gold had been reaching Frontieras, so we now decided to go gold hunting. Hitchcock alone doubted our success in California. He thought that Major Graham's command would gather all the gold before we could reach the placers, and volunteered to venture into Mapimi and cash the hair, the bounty amounting to over $2,000. Glanton gave the required permission, and with Long Webster and Charlie McIntosh, a Cherokee half-breed, Tom left with the scalps, both Indian and a greaser. We gave out that we were all going to Mapimi and passed through Frontieras together, making a great display of the raised hair and Indian lances. When 5 miles from the Presidio, Hitchcock and his 2 companions, after being instructed to meet up at the end of 8 days at a place well known to the band, Ojo del Conejo, or Rabbit Spring, kept on to the south. The rest in Indian file climbed the mesa on our left and pushed on over the parched up plain. We passed a few miserable herdsmen's huts, the inhabitants fleeing in affright, taking us for Apaches. To impress this belief more forcibly on their minds, we gave them a specimen of savage war whoops, and towards night, coming onto a drove of fat beeves, we killed several and sent the rest scampering away, with arrows sticking in their flanks. This with the remains of a poor vaquero who was slain and scalped by Judge Holden, was sufficient to convince all Arizona that the fell Apaches were out on the warpath in force. We passed the night in a deserted hacienda, feasting on the juicy beef and smoking the rest to pack along. Next day, we reached the rendezvous at Rabbit Spring. The place had been recently visited by numerous horsemen. The ground in the spring was trod into mire. There were fresh horse chips, remains of cattle, and other signs of late visitors. An arrow sticking in the lofty petahaya nearby informed the experienced eyes of our mountain men that the horsemen were Maricopas. Scouts were dispatched on all sides, hunting parties sent out. A camp was formed in a gulch near the spring, and every precaution taken to ensure our safety and comfort until the return of Hitchcock. Our scouts reported that the Indian Trail led towards New Mexico. The hunters returned with cattle and sheep, so we lived right royally. In 7 days, our hair traders returned. Their venture had been a decided success. Clanton's little affair had, after all, helped them, as the Sonorans continued to believe that the attack had been made by Apaches. Urea's agent paid them the cash, the Mexican scalps passing for good Indian without question. Hitchcock bought a supply of Pass whiskey, ammunition, and pinola. That night, a regular orgy was held in camp. Glanton proved that he was well fitted to be the master spirit of the fiendish band. Drinking deeply, he swore with the most fearful oaths that we were all sinners bound to eternal perdition, that it was his mission to save us. He then knelt down in well-chosen words, prayed with all the fervor of a hard-shell Baptist for the salvation of all. Suddenly he sprang up and, drawing his revolver, opened fire on us right and left. One of the Canadians received a shot in the leg as a gentle reminder to flee from the wrath to come. Judge Holden seized the madman in his powerful arms, laid him down, and soothed him as a mother would a fretful child, and Glanton soon sank into a drunken sleep. Next morning, we started for El Dorado, or the mystic city of Cibola. Tradition represented this city as situated in a deep valley surrounded by lofty mountains. It was inhabited by a race of white Indians called Pintos, and there was believed to be an abundance of gold and silver in the place. To find this great city, to sack and plunder it, appeared to the crazed brains of Glanton a matter of easy accomplishment. All believed in the legend, and all swore to follow Glanton to the death. We traveled for several days over a barren desert, destitute of all animal life, but the home of the great petahaya and the giant cactus. On the 3rd day, a strange object miles away attracted our notice. It appeared like a tent, but what was a tent pitched in the desert for? We started for it, and after 3 hours' ride, reached a sad scene: a broken wagon, skeletons of cattle and horses, the remains of an American immigrant man on the ground, while in the wagon was the bodies of a woman, a little girl, and boy, all killed by arrows and scalped. Singular to relate, the wagon was not plundered. We searched the baggage to find some clue to the mystery, but the only scrap of writing found was on the fly leaf of a small Mormon Bible, which was as follows: to Alice, from her defender Hickman. One of our men, Mountain Jim, who had been examining the arrows, said, "This is the work of white men. No doggone red N-word carry so many kind of arrows and leave them behind." The wagon was fired and the bodies consumed on the strange funeral pyre. We continued our weary, aimless march, and at the close of the day found water and gammer grass in an arroyo, to the great relief of our suffering animals. The next day, after climbing a rugged cerro, Glanton, who was at the head of the column, cried out, "El Dorado, at last, by God!" We all hurried to the front, where a most extraordinary spectacle greeted us. From the other side of an extensive plain rose the houses, towers, domes, and walls of a vast city. What appeared to be fortified walls ran for miles, and lofty battlements stood out in bold relief. The city had a strange, weird aspect, as of something unreal and unnatural. We sat in silence, gazing on this realization of all our hopes, when the mocking laughter of Judge Holden broke the spell. "So, Glanton, this is El Dorado, is it? The city of gold and fair women. I wish you joy of the discovery. A city of sandstone built by Dame Nature." It was too true. The grand city in our front, the legendary Cibola of the Spaniards, the city of white Indians of the trappers' tales, was one of those curious freaks of nature common in New Mexico. Strange shaped columns of sandstone wrought by the action of the rain on the hills during ages. Though we all were used to such sandstone formations, yet we had never met with any equal to this. Nature had carved out here a city whose towers and columns would cause the cyclopic ruins of Thebes and Luxor to appear like children's toys in contrast. As we neared the silent streets of the place, the beautifully proportioned Moorish domes, the light symmetrical towers became gradually piles of sandstone and marl. Looking back, the summit of the hill from which we first espied this El Dorado appeared crowned with a frowning fortress with plumed warriors on its walls. The illusion was perfect, yet it was only walls of marl with yuccas and cactus growing behind them. Judge Holden mounted a rock for a rostrum and gave us a scientific lecture on geology. The scalp hunters, grouped in easy attitudes, listened to the literati with marked attention. The whole formed an assemblage worthy of the pencil of a Salvator Rosa. Holden's lecture, with no doubt, was very learned, but hardly true, for one statement he made was that millions of years had witnessed the operation producing the result around us, which Glanton, with recollections of the Bible teaching his young mind had undergone, said it was a damned lie. Next morning, we moved out of the enchanted city, our route being towards the north. Indian signs were plenty today. A column of smoke rose straight in the air from a rock-crowned mesa that we had just passed. It was answered by another and still others, away off to the north, until over 20 of these signals were in sight. We had come to hunt redskins, but it seemed as if we might be hunted ourselves. No Indian had been seen, but evidently the Apache nation was aroused, for the signals covered hundreds of miles. A ride of 40 miles brought us to Gammer Grass and Water. Our mountain men pronounced the stream the Little Colorado. During the night, all was quiet. Some of the hunters had the good luck to kill a large brown bear, which was very acceptable, for we had had no fresh meat since we left Rabbit Spring. All the next day, mountain Indians was seen in the distance, but we moved on without being molested. This night, after a march of at least 50 miles, we were compelled to halt in the plain without water. Next day, we moved on over the hot, arid desert. When about noon, we descended into an arroyo, hoping to find water. No Indians or smoke had been seen that day, but of a sudden, a volley of arrows fell among us, and the Apaches' war whoop sounded on all sides. Though unexpected, the attack found us not unprepared. It was scarce the work of a minute for our entire party to be well covered behind the huge rocks, and our animals safely secured in the ravine. The only person visible to me was Ben Tobin, who shared with me the huge boulder behind which I crouched. Soon the crack of a rifle, succeeded by a wild cry, told us that our comrades were on the alert and a redskin hit. I incautiously raised up to look to see if I could see an Indian when three arrows whizzed by my head, one carrying away in my hat, with a hole in it more suitable for ventilation than ornamental purpose. Tobin called my notice to a movement on the mesa that rose some 400 yards from us on our right. The headdress of a warrior was seen behind a clump of yuccas as he reconnoitered the arroyo. As it satisfied that he was out of range, he left his covert and came forward to the very edge of the cliff, presented in bold relief against the sky as graceful a warlike figure as ever an ancient Greek warrior did. Lying flat down, I got his range when he gave a shrill cry, and I let him have it. His cry changed into a yell, and springing clear of the rock, he fell a corpse at the foot of the mesa. Then yells arose on all sides, arrows flew in clouds, and a crowd of painted, yelling, and leaping devils closed in on us from all quarters. The next few minutes seemed like hours to me. There was no mistake. I was badly scared, without knowing what I was about, laid about me like mad, out yelling the redskins themselves. All was confusion, rifles and pistols cracked, and the hoarse shouts of the rangers gave token that all were engaged. In 5 minutes, the horrible melee was over, and all that could of the enemy fled. Glanton and 5 others were with us in the last brush. While I expected to get humbled for being afraid, to my surprise, I received their rough compliments for doing grandly, and I found myself quite a hero. Five Apaches lay in sight besides the one at the foot of the hill. Glanton pointed out a grove of pecan and cabbage trees some 2 miles further down the bank of the arroyo and said we must gain that place or all of our animals would die of thirst. He gave his orders. The rangers crawled away to give the details to the rest. Soon one of the pack mules, loosened on purpose, dashed down the ravine toward the grove. This was the signal to go, and the next moment we were all in the saddle, and amidst a shower of arrows, and to our astonishment, shots from firearms, we charged on the skulking foes in our front and made for the refuge. When we left our covert, we could realize the extent of our danger. Indians on foot swarmed all around, throwing in their arrows like hailstones, and we saw several armed with escopettes. Their ponies were brought up, and now the mounted yelling fiends were on us again. Ride like devils for the timber, cried Glanton, and ride we did. I was soon out of the thickest of the conflict, and with 9 others, gained the grove unharmed. Out on the plain, a cloud of dust, shouts, and savage yells, and the reports of firearms told how desperate was the situation of our comrades. Our impulse was to go back to their assistance, but our orders were to hold the grove. We sprang off, secured our horses, tied lassos all around our shelter, and secured our pack mules as they came running in, the smell of water being their guide. Glanton made a desperate dash for our position, and with 13 others cut their way through and reached the grove. Holden and Long Webster came in on foot, their horses being killed. We now had breathing time to look about us. 14 of our party was missing, and of the 24 present, 7 were wounded, 4 quite seriously. 12 of our pack animals were gone, but fortunately our provision and ammunition mules had come in safe. All hands went to work with a will. Doc Irving attended to the wounded. Trees were cut down and formed into barricades. Our suffering animals watered from the spring of excellent water that gushed from under the roots of a gigantic pecan tree and picketed out to graze on the gammer grass. And taken altogether, our affairs were not so bad after all. The Apaches were having a big talk about a half mile from our position. One old shriveled up buck was making a violent speech, judging from his actions, and soon a cordon of warriors was thrown around our position. Our mountain men and Indian fighters were in high glee, for they said that there was no other water for 70 miles, and in consequence the savages would soon be compelled to vamoose. But they would not go without another trial. The mules that they had captured from us were brought into line and fastened together by lariats. Then a crowd of redskins dismounted, and under the cover of this moving breastwork advanced on us. Glanton ordered us to hold our fire until he gave the word. When they came within 200 yards and arrows struck the trees, he shot down the right flank mule, which made the left mule wheel around, exposing the storming column to our rifles. A deadly volley was poured in, and then 12 of us sprang on our horses and charged on them before they could regain their ponies. The result was most glorious. We regained the grove without loss, while 17 Indians lay on the plain and several warriors had to be helped into the saddle. The Apaches had enough. Their sentinels withdrew, and the entire party disappeared among the yuccas and rocks to the south. All of our mules were recaptured but two, and we caught several Indian ponies. Though the enemy had retreated, our situation was one of great danger. Our band reduced to 24, and only 14 of them fit for duty, hundreds of miles from any settlement, encumbered with our wounded, and liable to be attacked at any moment by fresh bands of hostile Indians. All this was sufficient to daunt the boldest and most experienced Indian trailer. John Glanton was a man of prompt action and remorseless in carrying out his decision. He ordered Holden and Irving to examine all of the wounded and report all that were unable to ride. Then he called us together in a distant part of the grove, where we received the report of the ministers of fate, who gave the names of 4 who could not travel any further at present. Glanton made a short but forcible speech. The drift of it was that mercy and our safety demanded the death of these 4, and that the laws of the desert sanction it. I was horrified and expressed myself freely, but the execution was ordered. All were compelled to draw lots to decide what 4 should commit the murders. 20 Apache arrows were placed in a coyote skin quiver, 4 of them being marked at the point. Thank God I drew a blank. The poor fellows had watched our proceedings with anxious eyes. One was a young Kentuckian, Dick Shelby. 2 were Delawares, and another a Sonoran. Sam Tate Chew, the one marked for Shelby. Long Webster, that of the Mexican, and Delaware Indian volunteered to dispatch the 2 of his tribe. They were informed of their fate and the best of care given them during the entire night. All were busy. The worst of the mules were killed and jerked, their hides made into moccasins, leggings, and bags of mesquite beans gathered. And after a few hours' sleep, all that could move were ready to start at early dawn. We moved off in silence, the executioners standing beside the victims with Apache war clubs in hand. As we cleared the grove, Glanton fired his pistol, when we all heard the dull, crushing sound that told us the deed was done. All felt sad and guilty. "37. The Great Canyon of the Colorado. We marched due north all day after the terrible sacrifice on the altar of necessity in the grove. Little conversation was held. We moved on in silence, moody and suspicious of each other. Our wounded suffered dreadfully, but with the lesson of the lottery of death before them, they endured their agony without complaint. Dr. Irving done wonders. He gathered a species of the cactus, cut away the outside and thorns, made a pulp of the soft part, and poulticed their wounds with it. This reduced the inflammation and had a wonderful cooling effect. A young Mexican, Manuel Rice, who had no less than 6 arrow wounds in his body, begged of me not to let him be killed as the men in the grove were. I firmly pledged myself to protect him. I sounded 3 of the men, and they declared that they were heartily sick of this butchering of comrades and would allow no more of it. With but 2 hours rest at noon, we pushed on all day and halted for the night in a strange old ruin with no water to be found. All we had in our gourds was gone, the wounded men having received the most of it. 2 of the poor fellows died during the night, which was one of extreme misery to all. Late in the afternoon the next day, a solitary cabbage palm pointed out water, and we remained here all next day. A bear and a bighorn was added to our commissary department, and our animals regained their strength. Glanton was of the opinion that the barranca in which we found the water ran into the Rio Colorado, and that we had better follow it down the junction, and then follow that river down to the Pima village on the Gala River. The old mountain men objected and said that the route was impassable because of the deep canyons and barrancas that intersected it. But Holden joined with Glanton, so bidding with reluctance goodbye to this oasis. We started down the winding bed of the ravine. As we advanced, the rocky walls rose higher and higher until we seemed shut out from the world. A little rivulet that trickled over the stony bed, sometimes disappearing for miles, then again forming deep pools full of fish of the trout species, was a source of great delight and comfort to us. which only those who have experienced a similar trip over the arid wastes of the alkaline deserts of the West can appreciate. At our noonday halt, we drank, bathed, washed our animals, and anyone seeing us would have thought we had no other object in view but to indulge in its benefits. Hitchcock shook his head and growled at the delay, and asked where we would be if rain fell in the country above us. Several clamored to return, but Glanton swore he would shoot the first man who made the attempt. This stopped all complaints, and repacking, we continued on our way. Judge Holden rode with me and stated that he knew that we would be obliged to retrace our steps, but that Glanton's plan gave him an opportunity of seeing the greatest natural wonder of the world, the unexplored Great Canyon of the Colorado, reported by hunters as a cut through the plain for 1 to 5 miles in depth and extending for some 300 miles. As we rode along, Holden, in spite of my repugnance of the man, interested me greatly by his description of the great cut and how it might have been formed. He also was fluent regarding the ancient races of Indians that at a remote period covered the desert with fields of corn, wheat, barley, and melons, and built large cities with canals bringing water from rivers hundreds of miles distant. To my question how he knew all this encyclopedian scalp hunter replied, "Nature, these rocks, this little broken piece of clay," holding up a little fragment of painted pottery, such are found all over the desert. The ruins scattered all over the land, all tell me the story of the past. We passed the night at a pool of water. I thought of rain, as it was now late in November, and looked at driftwood lodged in crevices fully 50 feet above our heads with a shudder. Next day, about 10 in the forenoon, a shout from the men on the advance caused us all to hurry ahead, when we found ourselves standing on the brink of a chasm that cleft the earth to an unknown depth at our feet, the great canyon of the Colorado at last. We dismounted, and lying on the rocky bed of the canyon, we looked down the awful gulf under us. Away down, far, far below, we could see a bright silver ribbon, the water of the great river of the West, here imprisoned between walls whose height and vast extent seemed to shut it out forever from the light of day. The depth of the canyon we had no means of determining, but Holden, Doc Irving, and Ben Tobin agreed in giving it a depth of 3,000 feet, or not quite 2/3 of a mile, while the mountain men swore that it was a good 3 miles. I believe the first estimate is rather over than under, for judging from the banks of the barranca that we were in, which rose not over 600 feet above us, the opening below did not appear over 3 times deeper. But at any rate, it is the greatest wonder I ever saw. In the rainy season, when a torrent 50 feet deep rushes down the barranca and leaps over the sheer precipice of so frightful a depth, what a grand and stupendous cataract it must be. This thought struck us all, and after many a hard word with Glanton for getting us in such a position of danger, we started up the barranca. I'm satisfied that we were the first white men who ever saw the Great Canyon from this point. What is very singular in regard to it is that the cut is not through the mountains, but through a level plain, with mountains rising above it from 3 to 12,000 feet. In 2 days' march, without any incident, we reached our former stopping place, the spring of the Lone Cabbage Palm. We reached it none too soon, for that night the storm of rain burst over the desert with great fury. The rain fell heavy all the next day, but we resumed our march, our animals receiving new life from the torrents of water that pounded down on the thirsty earth. 5 days of hard marching brought us to the Gila River, opposite a village of Pima Indians. We built rafts of dry cottonwood and prepared to cross. Glanton, savage and surly, swore he would assault the place and give no quarter to man, woman, or child. Holden supported him, but Hitchcock, Tobin, and all the mountain men not only opposed this cruel massacre, but swore it should not take place. 2 of our men had been at the village before and spoke in strong terms of the kind and peaceful character of the inhabitants. Glanton finally put it to vote, and all but 3 voted against the slaughter. A party of Indians came down on the other bank and hailed us in Spanish, offering their assistance, and soon crossed over by swimming. They had stout, short figures with their hair cut square across the forehead and hanging down the back or done up in a strange sort of club. They appeared very friendly and glad to see us, and with their assistance we safely crossed the now swollen Gila and marched to their village. We obtained from a chief a small supply of flour, beans, and pumpkins. The old fellow excusing himself for not furnishing more, as the Camisas Colorado, Graham's command, had consumed everything that they had for sale. I was struck with the graceful proportions of the young Pima girls, regular bronze Venuses, but with the exception of their eyes, their features were rather repulsive than otherwise. The women dressed of a skirt of cotton cloth or strips of the inner bark of the cottonwood. They wore padding on their hips and behind their skirts, in fact, regular bustles. The men went almost naked, though a few had on shirts obtained from Graham's command. They had an odd fashion of filling their hair full of mud from the Gila, then twisting it up into a helmet-like form and letting it dry. This served a threefold purpose. It was an effectual protection from the clubs of their natural enemies, the Yumas of the Colorado. It increased the growth of hair and was sure death to the piojos who became prisoners in this singular adobe prison. From cotton of their own raising, they weave blankets in the most primitive manner, 4 sticks being all they require for the loom. Their fields are irrigated by a system of canals from the Gila, the women doing the work of the fields, while the men take care of the children and do the weaving. We remained here 2 days, and in company with Judge Holden, Doc Irving, Tobin, and 3 others, with several Pimas for guides, we visited some remarkable ruins about 12 miles up the river. These were the remains of 3 houses. Our guide said that Montezuma built them. They were made of mud with coarse gravel mixed in, forming a kind of concrete. I sketched them from different points, much to the wonder of our guides. In all directions, I found what must have been the sites of houses or corrals, oblong circles of stones, while the ground was covered with broken pottery, and we found 3 stones similar to those used by the Mexican women in grinding corn. On our return, we found Glanton raving drunk from fermented juice of the agave, obtained from some Coco Maricopas who lived in another village close by. To prevent trouble, Glanton was lassoed and bound fast for the night. The next day, I believe, I was waited on by the entire village to be sketched, our guides of the day having well advertised my great abilities as an artist. The girls gathered round me, forming beautiful groups of living statuary. They seemed shy and modest, but full of fun, and like all the sex overflowing with curiosity. They laughed and chattered like magpies, their bead-like eyes sparkling with merriment. I gave away several drawings to the belles, who returned the compliment by bringing me huge watermelons, one which gave me a cotton sash, such as the bucks wear on their heads, woven with bright red and blue lines. While I was sketching, an uproar arose in the village, caused by Holden seizing hold of one of the girls and proceeding to take gross liberties with her person. A dozen cocked rifles brought to bear on him drove the brute from his prey, but the whole village was in ferment, and it seemed as if we stood a chance of being wiped out. However, Holden made some explanation to the crowd in Spanish that appeased them. On the 3rd day, we bid goodbye to those half-civilized savages and started down the Gila for the Colorado. After a 5 days' march, we reached the bluffs at the junction of the 2 rivers in good condition. Indians showed themselves and at first appeared hostile, but soon flocked around us with offers to ferry us across the Colorado. They belonged to a tribe known as the Yumas and were in stature superior to the Pimas. We rested at their village for 2 days, recruiting ourselves and animals for the hardships to be encountered in crossing the great Colorado Desert, where for 130 miles, according to the Indians, all was sand, with no water to be found. A ferry was about 4 miles below the junction of the 2 rivers and consisted of 2 boats made from wagon bodies, which I recognized as having been part of the equipment of Graham's command. The letters U.S. were still visible. I told Glanton of this when a dirty old chief pulled out of a skin pouch a greasy bit of paper with the well-known, to me at least, signature of L.P. Graham, making a present of the pontoon boat to the head of the chief of the tribe for services rendered to his command in crossing. The other boat, they said, they found on the desert, that there were many more there. Glanton and Holden, after we made camp, had a long conference together, and from Holden's earnest manner, I was sure some new devilish scheme was on foot. Next morning, Glanton unfolded his plans. He told us that this ferry was our El Dorado, our gold mine, the gate to California, and he proposed to seize it, kill the Indians if they objected, capture the young girls for wives, etc. A few of us opposed the diabolical scheme, but the measure was carried by an overwhelming majority, and the plan organized to make it a success. During the day, our camp swarmed with Yumas, and at a signal from Glanton, the 2 boats and 9 of the prettiest girls were secured. The Indians, being unarmed, fled without resistance, and Glanton's coup d'etat was a decided success. The poor captive girls, who seemed to expect death, were tied hand and foot and placed under a guard, and all the rest went to work to build a fort on the summit of an isolated hill near the ferry. The ground was covered with loose stones of irregular shape, and with men working for their lives, it did not require much time to erect a circular wall, capable of holding our entire party and well constructed for defense against any weapons such as the Yumas possessed. We named it Fort Defiance. Indians hovered around the camp all night, and next day many warriors appeared above and below our fortification. And about noon, 4 of them advanced towards us, waving their hands and crying out, "Amigo, amigo." Glanton and 3 others, laying aside all arms but their revolvers, which they concealed under their serapes, went out to meet them. The Yumas demanded the return of the boats, the girls, and our departure. To this, Glanton replied that he should keep all that he had taken, and if they did not supply him with beans and bunch grass, he would destroy their village and kill all. Their answer was to produce short, heavy clubs, and with loud cries they rushed on Glanton's party, who at once dropped 4 of them with the Colts. By force of habit, the savage's hair was raised and brought in. The Yumas, seeing this, retired with many howls to the deep shade of a willow thicket that covered the bank. So matters remained for several days, no Indians appearing to trouble us, and all hands kept busy strengthening our camp and ferrying over numerous parties of Mexicans on their way to California. Glanton, leaving the gang in charge of Holden, left for the California settlements with 3 of our party to buy beef, taking with them over $1,000. Indians only appeared at a distance, and business at the ferry was brisk and highly lucrative, as we demanded and received $4 per head for all crossings, and $1 a head for all animals, we swimming alongside the boats to which they were made fast by lassos. Our honorable captain returned alone after 10 days' absence with no beef, no money, but 2 animals, 1 a mule loaded with whiskey, a few pounds of coffee, sugar, and ship's biscuit. He was quite sober, but cross and surly. He said his companions had deserted him and gone to the gold mines, that he had got into trouble in San Diego with some soldiers, had killed 2, and was fortunate in getting away with a whole skin. He also informed us that a party of Sonorans were 2 days back on the desert, on their way home from the mines, that he had traveled with them to the place called Vallecita, and that they had plenty of gold in their possession. Glanton proposed in a cool, business-like way for his band of cutthroats to wipe out the entire party. An indignant refusal from all the band but the 2 principals admonished him that he had gone too far, and he passed it off as a joke. That night, another disgusting orgy was indulged in by Glanton and most of his band, which now numbered only 15. I had become so thoroughly horrified with the hellish deeds of my companions that dread feelings akin to the nightmare took possession of me, making my days miserable and my nights a series of fearful dreams. I sounded like Ben Tobin, Hitchcock, and Long Webster on the subject of quitting the gang and going to the mines in California. They were as disgusted as myself, and we agreed to start whenever a favorable opportunity presented itself, and formed our plans accordingly. One morning, about 2 days later, Tobin, Hitchcock, and Webster volunteered to go to the river bottom to cut firewood. Each day, 3 men were detailed for this duty, while I was to guard the animals grazing on the brush-like grass nearby. Hitchcock had secured 13 onzas, or doubloons, which we had secreted in the timber. We had secreted in the timber some jerked mule meat and 2 gourds of whiskey. As per arrangement, we 4 met about 10 in the forenoon, behind a huge sand drift about a mile from Fort Defiance. I mounted on Soldan, the others on the best mules of the band. With the statement of Glanton and the Sonorans in regard to the desert fresh in our minds, we let our animals drink their fill at a gully, while we filled our blankets with the screw-shaped bean of the mesquite bush. We were just ready to take the plain trail of the immigrants through the cottonwoods to the sandy plain that stretched between us and California, when savage yells with 3 shots reached our ears from the direction of the fort. We rode down to the river again, and Fort Defiance was in plain sight. The bluff on which it was built was covered with howling Indians. Glanton, rubbed out by God, was crying Tom's eulogy on his old commander as we rode back through the timbered bottom, somehow feeling sad and blaming ourselves for deserting in the hour of danger and death. But Tobin, the renegade priest, the profane and wicked reckless ranger, raised his sombrero and said, "It's the hand of God. To him and you, Palancillo Jack, his blind instrument, we owe our lives. Ho for the desert, for California and gold." We toiled through loose drift sand for some time, then the trail left the cottonwoods and struck boldly out on the great desert, the Jornada del Muerto, or Journey of Death. We moved on some 20 miles and came to a clump of mesquite bushes in a sink of the plain. A well had been dug here, but it was now filled with sand. 3 dilapidated government wagons had been abandoned nearby, with several dead mules, dried to mummies. A tailboard made fast to the bows of one of the wagons bore the following legend, cut with a knife: Cook's Wells, water 10 foot deep, D.H. Rucker. My old commander's card, out here in the California desert. How the name brought up all the romance of my soldier life in the Dragoons, of Monterey, Buena Vista, of her, the incomparable, the sainted Carmelita. How wretched, how wicked I felt, as the visions of my wild, irregular life passed with panoramic distinctness before me, raised by the name of my friend and commander. A deep draught at the whiskey drove away such unpleasant thoughts. Seeing no water could be obtained for want of digging tools, we moved off on the well-defined trail. Tobin, looking back towards the Colorado, suddenly halted and with an exclamation of astonishment caused the rest of us to look in the same direction. Away off towards the dark belt of timber that marked the course of the river, we could see several figures of men coming our way. Even at the distance they were from us, we could plainly make out that one of them was a white man who was fleeing for his life from savages. Without a word, our blanket of mesquite beans was thrown to the ground. The spurs drove into our animals, and away we went to the rescue. As I neared the scene, I recognized the gigantic form of Judge Holden, who had been brought to bay by about a dozen yelling Yumas, who appeared to be armed only with their short clubs. Holden was resting, leaning on his heavy rifle, which he had been using as a war club, with effect, for one savage lay brained at his feet, while the rest were seated on their haunches around him, like a pack of prairie wolves mound a fagged buffalo bull. Neither Holden or the buck showed the least sign of being aware of my approach until I raised the old yell of the dragoons, when the Yumas, with their strange, sharp war cry like the bark of a coyote, started off on a run. I charged on one who wore a shirt that I recognized as belonging to a Mexican of our party, rode him down, but my gallant steed stumbled on him, throwing me over his head. I was not hurt and was on my feet at once, just as Holden dashed out the brains of the Red Devil with the butt of his rifle. "Just in time, Jack," he said. "I owe you one," and held out his huge hand. I replied, "No thanks, the service is of no value," and did not take the extended hand. My tres compañeros now came up, and Long Webster dismounted and gave his mule to the judge, and we resumed our way. We passed by Cook's Wells and continued our course until late in the afternoon, when we rested for 2 hours. We traveled several hours this night on foot, leading our animals. There was no mistaking the trail. Deserted wagons and skeletons of horses and mules marked every rod of ground. This was a black day with us. We all became cross and distrustful of each other, and as yet I don't think any of us suffered much from hunger or thirst. At midday, we gave the animals the last of the beans and finished our jerked muley, when Holden volunteered, if I would let him have my horse, to push on to the settlements, obtain a supply of meat and water, and return. I saw through the scoundrel's design and refused, but an hour later, when he was riding Soldan, he whipped him into a run and was off. I was plodding along with the rest, carrying my rifle, when a shout from the treacherous villain made me realize my loss and his base ingratitude. I threw up my rifle, but he had gained too great a distance for a sure shot. When some 600 yards off, he held up and cried out to us, "You cursed robbers and murderers, I go to denounce you in the settlements. You shall hang in California." And with another yell of triumph dashed off. He did not get far, for so done stumbled, throwing his rider, and before he could recover himself, we were on him with our rifles bearing on his villainous heart. The judge tried to turn it off as a joke, but we kept an ominous silence. I was left with him while the other three retired and consulted. They soon returned and informed him of his fate, to be tied fast with a lariat and left. Heaven, how he begged and pleaded, but in vain. He soon made fast to a half-buried wagon body, his arms secured behind him, and then as we departed, his entreaties changed into curses and ravings. We rode on in moody silence for several miles. When we halted and looked back, we could see him in the distance, a small dark spot on the desert. I could not stand it. He is a white man and no goddamn greaser or buck, and I'll be damned if he shall go under in that fashion, I cried out. And without waiting for answer, I started back. It took me a good hour to reach the miserable wretch, and as I dismounted, drew my bowie knife, and advanced on him. Judging my motive by his own black heart, he begged me not to kill him, to let him live, even to linger and die of starvation. What a cowardly heart the bully had. I cut the rawhide thongs without a word and rode off. My companions had kept on, and as I reached the rise where I left them, I could just discern them some 6 miles away. Looking back, I was surprised to see Holden not over a mile in my rear. Paul Sodan showed much distress, and while I favored him all I could, I was compelled to urge him along at a trot under spur. At dark, none were in sight. I was alone once more in the desert, hungry, thirsty, and weary. I broke down completely and found myself blubbering like a child. I had fancied myself a man when I was nothing but a boy. When I dismounted, Soldan, more weak and used up than his master, stretched himself with a groan on the sand. Wrapping myself up in a blanket, I lay down between my old companion's legs, and with my head resting on his flank, fell asleep. I awoke with a start, chilled to the bone, sore, stiff, and hungry. It was yet dark, no signs of day in the east. The sky appeared black, and seemed to close in and shut down on me, while the stars seemed like little cuts in the black cover, through which a light beyond was seen. I aroused my weary companion, and cold and shivering with the bridle over my arm, led the way guided by the North Star and the debris of former caravans. I walked on for hours with nothing living in sight. The sun had come up, of a dull brassy color, and the sky was like bronze. Away to the north, the black mountains of California seemed to recede as I advanced. I knew I must reach them before I could obtain water. What little sugar I had I gave to Soldan, who showed much weakness, his 2 falls having evidently strained him. At noon we halted for 2 hours, then once more resumed our solitary way. I was getting weak, my heavy arms weighed me down like lead. I had drawn my waist belt tighter and tighter, until I was shaped like a wasp. On we went for hours, but the black mountains seemed as far off as ever. Long into the dark night we stumbled on, until we sank exhausted on the sand. I slept but little this night, and at daylight it was difficult to get Soldan to his feet. He carried my arms, and I had to partially pull him along. All day we kept on, lying down now and then staggering on, trying to gain on those craggy peaks, which always fled before us. Towards night, Soldan stopped and refused to go any further. He groaned and seemed in much distress, and when I threw off the saddle, he fell to the ground. I raised his head in my lap, crying as if my heart would break. I knew it was my duty to shoot him and put an end to his sufferings, but my heart failed me. Spreading over him my blanket, I loaded myself down with my arms, and went on my solitary way towards those distant peaks. The sun went down, darkness shut down around me, yet I staggered on. My tongue was dry, my mouth felt as if full of ashes, yet somehow I never lost heart or hope. I prayed silently to my heavenly Father for strength to enable me to reach water. Finally, I fell down and lay like a corpse until morning. Next day, the sun was high overhead when I was saluted with a cry like coyotes, and 2 Indians came in sight from behind a sand drift. Weak and raving as I was, I managed to draw up my revolver when they threw up their arms and cried out, "Amigo, amigo," and held up a double-headed gourd. They gave me a long drink, which tasted reekingly of sulfur. Using signs, I made them understand that my horse might be saved, and one of them went back to look. The other guided me on for several hours until we came to their village. To my great delight, I found my three comrades sitting in front of a campfire and getting my supper: broiled mule meat, acorn bread, and real pure coffee. They told me the place was called Valicita, or Little Valley, the first water after leaving the Rio Colorado, 125 miles away. They had arrived some 12 hours ahead of me and sent the diggers back to my rescue. Next day, to my great joy, the second Indian came in leading Soldan, who he had found following up the trail. Hitchcock, who acted as an interpreter, engaged two of the bucks to go back for my saddle, promising them and the man who saved my horse my old ragged red shirt, and this without consulting me. It was all the shirt I had. We concluded to remain here several days to recruit our animals. Two of the Indians agreed to go ahead to the Spanish settlements to purchase a beef for us with the doubloon we gave them for that purpose. They were Cristianos and appeared trusty as Indians go. Our animals seemed to relish the coarse, wiry grass and the stinking water, and we turned them out to graze without a guard. On my second night here, we received quite a fright. It was towards morning when a shout from Ben Tobin awoke us, and the sight that greeted us caused us to seize our arms. Seated cross-legged by the fire, broiling raw meat, was the gaunt specter of the judge. The old scoundrel acted as cool as if nothing unpleasant had ever happened. On being interrogated, we found to our great indignation that when he reached Valicita, guided by the light of our fire, he had in the dark stumbled onto our animals, killed one of the mules, Ben Tobin's, and cut out a chunk, which he was now eating. On the desert, when he was about dead, some Indians had come across him and given him some water and parched acorns. They must have been the ones going after my saddle. We held a hurried council of war. At first, we decided to shoot the miscreant, but on second sober thought, we let him off and were soon roasting tough chunks of Tobin's mule and cracking jokes at that worthy's expense. Next day, we gave the mule's offals to our Indian friends, who held a grand powwow and ate up everything. On the third day, there being no sign of the Indians we sent for beef, we decided to start for the settlements, informing Holden that he could not go with us, but must remain one day after we left. After a tedious march of 6 hours over a barren rocky country and some miles of it through a narrow pass, we reached the Indian rancheria of San Felipe, where we found grass and water. Here our Indians met us with 2 beeves instead of 1, and we found that they had paid only $4 for both. We killed one, made a good meal of its lean, stringy meat, cut off some of the best pieces to pack along, gave the rest to the Indians, and the live one to its driver for his trouble. Postscript. It is on this rather abrupt note that Chamberlain's My Confession comes to a close. However, the historical record offers a few clues to his whereabouts in the aftermath. On May 5th, 1950, 3 Americans claiming to be members of Glanton's gang presented themselves before the alcalde of Los Angeles, telling a story of their narrow escape from Indians on the Colorado in April. Their names were Marcus L. Webster, William Carr, and Joseph A. Anderson. Webster is named in My Confession. The other 2 are presumably aliases for Chamberlain and another scalp hunter. The local militia was roused by their story and established an army post at the ford, near the original site of Glanton's Fort Defiance. After this, Chamberlain's exact whereabouts are unclear for a period of 3 years. He lived in California, apparently quite satisfied with the climate, and was known to have participated in William Walker's 1853 filibustering expedition to Baja California. Afterwards, he sailed home to New England, taking the scenic route around the world. Despite returning to the relative domesticity of Boston, Chamberlain did not remain tranquil for long, nor did he give up his romantic streak. However, he finally did settle down, marrying Mary Keith in 1855. He would stay with Mary for the rest of his life, having 3 daughters, Transita, Dolores, and Carmelita. In typical Chamberlain fashion, he worked various jobs, though only his time as a teamster and eventually a policeman are recorded. It was during this time, 1855 to 1861, that Chamberlain began work on his memoirs. At the first shots of the Civil War were fired in 1861, Chamberlain wasted no time in volunteering for his home state. once again joining a rowdy group of volunteers. This time he was elected first lieutenant, a rank from which he quickly rose. After 4 years of combat, he rose to the rank of general in the Union Army. In 1863, at Kelly's Ford in Virginia, he was seriously wounded by a bullet which passed through his face and lodged itself between his shoulders, which placed him out of action for the rest of the war. By the close of the conflict, Chamberlain had risen from first lieutenant to a brevet brigadier general. However, the action of the Civil War also had the effect of stopping his writing, hence Confession's abrupt close. After the war, Chamberlain became politically active, receiving an appointment as the Deputy Quartermaster General of Massachusetts. Following this, Chamberlain began his final career as warden of state prisons in Massachusetts and Connecticut. During his 2 decades as warden, he was known as humane and understanding, despite, or perhaps due to, his own violent, swashbuckling background. After his retirement in 1893, Chamberlain led a quiet family life at home, a manor which he dubbed Maple Hall. He passed of old age on November 10th, 1908. Historian Roger Butterfield noted the Boston newspapers remarked at the time that he was known throughout the circles of the Grand Army of the Republic as the veteran of veterans of Massachusetts. He had 14 horses shot in battle and was wounded 7 times. In all, he participated in more than 100 battles. It was a life of adventure, danger, and intrigue equaled by few. The end. Thank you for listening.